make of, and that's just what it is. And a lot of times, if you're assessing things that by people you don't know online, you may end up speaking out of context, and yes, you could be wrong. Just like I could be wrong here as well with my assessments sometimes. But I can only speak from what I know, and that's why I call the reaction segment out of context. All right, so we're going to see a lot more examples of what I am talking about today. But before we get into that, there's this young lady that I wanted to show you. Her name is, like I said earlier, I was going to talk about her. Let me see. And these are sizable books. They're minimum 200 pages. You can download them absolutely for free by simply going to, for example, this one, you just go to getmymarriageback.com, smartrealestatewholesaling.com, realestatemoneysecrets.com. So yes, I am a 3 times author, and those books are out there for your consumption, and they are also available everywhere on Amazon, anywhere that you pick up books. So in case you prefer a physical book like that. All right, welcome back. So we're talking about Rollo Tomassi. Rollo Tomassi is the author of a book called The Rational Male. I think he published the book back in 2013. In recent times, the book is getting some more popularity because of things like Clubhouse, because of YouTube, and then also he's also going viral on as we speak. He's going viral on because of his podcast and the clips that he's putting out there. Rollo Tomassi, to me, is an interesting creature, an interesting human being. I've read the book, almost done, to be honest with you, and the book has some fantastic points to it. And I think the best of Rollo Tomassi can be found in the book. I don't think his podcast is going to do him too good in terms of the credibility and what he brings. I do think he's found quite a little bit of balance, and but I think one thing he can work on is his assumptions on human beings, and it's a lot of assumptions there. When it comes down to factual, when it comes down to empirical data, as usual, he knows what he's talking about. But I think, like many men, as he would admit to himself, with many men, the problem is in application to real life. And that's what we're having problems with Rollo Tomassi. That's what I have problem with, right? I think he's, when it comes to his book, is pretty on point with some of the observations he's made over the years in terms of intersexual relationship, intergender relationships, and things like that. But in recent times, it's picked fights, unnecessary beefs with some public figures. I understand it a little bit when you label people blue pill or you label them beta, even though those things are not necessarily a crime. None of those things are necessarily a crime. People tend to take an offense because you're telling them almost they feel like you're saying they're less than, and it doesn't have to be. But again, everything is in tone, everything is in your demeanor, your decorum when you're saying these things. And Rollo seems like he doesn't understand that, and that's kind of weird. But let me play some of the clips here that I feel like will explain what I am talking about, and let's get into it. Let's get started right away.
Rationality, of empiricism, of reason will always sound like anger. It will always sound like hate. It will always sound like bitterness or It will.
So that already right off the back doesn't make any sense. Sound like anger, sound like bitterness, sound like those things sound like emotion. They don't sound like rationalizing anything. Let's keep going.
Always sound like there is some sort of deeper seated problem to a generation.
There's usually deeper seated problems. When you get into a space where you feel the need as a human being to rationalize everything, that's precisely part of emotionalism. And this is the problem that we're having in this conversation. The idea of discounting feelings and emotions always backfires because you're dealing with human beings with the very nature of emotions, compassion, right? The need to be right, all of these different things, right?
That has been born, raised, and acculturated, and basically steeped in emotionalism for its entire life. You will never win an emotional argument with rationality and reason, and you will never win a
Precisely. So he's hit the nail on the head right there. When somebody is speaking from quote unquote trying to be rational and the other person is just being a human being, emotional human being. So as opposed to the way he said it, like it's almost like something is wrong with emotions, right? When you understand that, right, suddenly things will change dynamics very quickly, right? So yeah, that's kind of interesting.
rational argument with emotionalism, and that's where the disconnect happens. And I made that point in the last video that I did on Friday. I try to make that point. I'm gonna repeat it here because I'm gonna start doing this here in just a moment here, because this is feels before reels, and the larger we get, the bigger the narrative, the bigger the attention that a lot of the stuff, the topics that I've been talking about, like I said, for over 20 years, the larger the attention we get, whether it's me or anybody else, the larger it gets, the more we're going to have to deal with that emotionalism versus reason. That's exactly what happened with Matt Walsh and the beer.
So emotionally versus reasoning, it's a big battle of that going on, and it's kind of funny that people that claim to be more rational are usually expressing all of these different data factual points from a place of emotions. Okay, and I'm going to show you tons of examples of that today. As a matter of fact, without any further ado, let me show you a video clip of exactly a lot of things you're going to see today.
Hey! Wait! Hey! Wait! Hey! Wait! Get off of me, nigga! What's wrong with you, nigga?
Come on, where my glasses?
Get off of me before I drop your goofy ass again. Now beat that, bitch ass nigga. Pay for this shit. Hurry up.
No,
Pay for that shit and hurry up before I drop your ass again. Touch me, then I'm
Yo,
gonna drop
stop
you.
video for they
Quit
help
touching
me.
me.
You got my key.
Quit touching me.
help you.
No,
Let me help
come
you.
Yeah, so that is what you're going to see a lot of today. He just mentioned Michaela, right? He just mentioned Michaela Peterson, who is the daughter of Peterson. And in the last, in the last month or so, there's a lot of back and forth beef. As a matter of fact, I watched the podcast of Michaela interviewing Rollo in the last like a month ago or so, after Rollo had already dragged her from a lot of assumptions that he made just off of the clips that he saw online. Now, granted, whatever you see online is basically what we make of, and that's just what it is. And a lot of times, if you're assessing things that by people you don't know online, you may end up speaking out of context, and yes, you could be wrong, just like I could be wrong here as well with my assessments sometimes. But I can only speak from what I know, and that's why I call the reaction segments out of context. All right, so we're going to see a lot more examples of what I am talking about today. But before we get into that, there's this young lady that I wanted to show you. Her name is, like I said earlier, I was gonna talk about her. Let me see her name.